Kia ora. Welcome to Conversations with Wāhine, brought to you by the Wellington branch of the National Council of Women, New Zealand. So today we have two guests with us, both Labour MPs. We've got Steph Lewis and Dr. Anae Neru Leavasa. Steph Lewis was born in Whanganui and grew up between Kaitoke Prison village, where her dad worked as a prison officer, and on her family's farm in Waverley. She is the Labour MP for Whanganui, which includes South Taranaki and Stratford. Along with that, she lives in Whanganui with her husband, daughter, and son, both 5 and 1 years old. Since university, she has worked as an employment advocate, a lawyer, an advisor, and an investigator. Steph played a significant role in securing government funding for the Whanganui Port redevelopment during the 2017 campaign. Since early this year, Steph has been the chair of the Primary Production Select Committee and also chairs Labour's Rural Caucus. Thank you so much for joining us today, Steph.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And our second guest is Dr. Anae Neru Leavasa. He's a passionate, hardworking advocate and has served as the inaugural MP for Takanini. He has lived in South Auckland for over 30 years, and he's married and has 2 young children. His parents immigrated from Samoa in the 1980s, and after surviving metastatic bone cancer, Dr. Anae was inspired to train as a specialist GP to provide support to his community. He graduated from the University of Auckland Medical School and became a Fellow of the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners. Dr. Anae is a keen humanitarian, having been posted on 2 assignments in the Pacific with both the Red Cross and a Doctors Worldwide volunteer organisation. He has also served in rural farming communities as a GP. He established the inaugural Takanini Electorate Youth Council and currently chairs the Health, Wellbeing and Social Services Caucus Committee, and along with the role, Deputy Chair for the Health Select Committee. We really appreciate you taking out the time to join us today, Anae. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Well, kia ora, talofa. Thanks for having me.
So first of all, Steph, with an environmental and economic crisis underway, your role must be a particularly interesting place to be right now. What sectors and industry does this title cover?
So when we talk about primary industries, we're talking about what most people refer to nowadays as our food and fibre sector. So, you know, those people who grow our meat, who grow our vegetables, who produce our wool, you know, our seafood industry, our forestry industry, or the aquaculture now, fishing and aquaculture. So it's really, really broad. And then you've also got all of those support or ancillary services, support services that support our rural communities, you know, like engineering, farm accountants, you know, the milk manufacturers and cheese makers and vets, you know, so there's a lot. When we talk about the primary industries or the food and fibre sector, we're talking about a huge chunk of New Zealand's economy.
Besides the election, what are your main points of interest in these areas in particular right now?
Yeah, so as you touched on in your introduction, my mum and dad wanted to be farmers. So my dad was a prison officer by day, and when I was a young child, they purchased a bare block of land in the back of Waverley, a hill country sheep and beef farm, and so that's where my interest from the primary industries has come from. Experiencing that, having, you know, grown up, seeing the impact on my family of, you know, a dip in commodity prices. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about the drop in price for wool. So, you know, at the moment we're going through a bit of that again with our farmers, and sometimes, you know, I'm talking to farmers who the wool check that they get from the wool clip isn't actually covering the cost of the shearers to get them in and shear the sheep. But so I'm really passionate about supporting our farmers to be the absolute best that they can be in a really sustainable way, in a profitable way. I was in a farm yesterday in Harita where they are milking sheep. They've got over 2,000 ewes that they milk every season, and they're doing it in a really sustainable way, and that's the kind of diversification and industry leading stuff that I'm really excited to support.
No, that's really cool. It's really exciting to see the new developments that are coming in, and I think seeing more people go towards a more natural basis when it comes to farming as well, and taking more of the biodiversity into account. It's really exciting to see. So it must be an awesome place to be at right now.
It absolutely is. There are so many amazing initiatives. I've been to see farms where they're creating wetlands again because they realize the importance of bringing back that biodiversity. A crude way of explaining a wetland, I guess, and sorry, Anae, with your medical background, but it kind of acts a little bit like a liver for our environment, like absorbing those toxins, taking it out, preventing nitrogen from running off into our waterways. And it's a great way to bring biodiversity back, and good sink for carbon as well. So wetlands, riparian planting, those are just some of the initiatives that we're seeing across our food and fibre sector, particularly on farm, where they're really thinking about their environmental impact of the activity that they're doing, and how to improve it and protect that environment for future generations.
Oh, it's fantastic. Leading on from that, you entered Parliament some time ago now, and then went on to have a child while working as an MP, among a ton of other responsibilities, as you can see, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about what drew you to office, and how you've managed to integrate your personal and professional life? And what support have you had from Parliament as a mother to young children?
Yeah, so what drew me to Parliament, again, it comes back to my family's farm, and there was no house up there on the farm when we built it, and when we brought it, and the road down to the farm was actually too dangerous to use in winter. It was literally just a dirt farm track, and so there was no way that my parents could live out their dream and build a house up there without getting the road fixed. And I still really clearly remember the day when they came home from court, and that look of defeat on their faces, and that really stuck with me. And I just remember deciding in that moment that seemed really unfair. Here was people who just wanted to build a life for their family, get a fair go, and I just decided that whatever I did with my life, I wanted it to be something that would help people to achieve their dreams, whatever that may look like. And the other really key memory in my life as well is my dad's work as a prison officer, and we actually lived across the road from the prison in my early years. And I just remember sort of asking about what a prison is, and I'd get told, "Oh, that's where bad people go, Steph." And I'd say, "Well, why?" "Oh, they did bad things, Steph." "Well, why did they do that?" And it was always at that last question that the people I was talking to would kind of stumble and be like, "Oh, I don't actually know." So I think that sparked my interest in social justice. And then after university, coming back to Whanganui, back home, and seeing things getting harder for the families that I'd grown up with, it struck quite, I went to a kindergarten here, and an ECE teacher said to me, "Look, that 3-year-old boy over there, Steph, is living in a car with his mum and dad up at the cemetery." And that's not the Whanganui I grew up in. That's not the New Zealand I grew up in. And then somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Would you stand, Steph? Would you think about becoming a candidate for Labour?" And I thought, yeah, sure, why not? Why not, stand up for what I believe in and put my skills to use.
That's amazing. Touching on that, so your father was a corrections officer for 33 years, and he said that the vast majority of people he had encountered could be rehabilitated and reintegrated if they were given the right resources. Did he share much of his own personal experience with you? And what are your thoughts on how the prison system has changed between the time that your dad worked in it and now?
Yeah, so no, he didn't talk about his work a lot. He kept that quite confidential, obviously, to protect the privacy of the individuals that he worked with. But after he passed away, I was helping my mum go through some of Dad's stuff, and I found a ring binder in a box, and the ring binder was full of incident reports that he had kept from his career, and it included some really, graphic stuff. He'd been assaulted by a prisoner. He had been stuck with a needle while searching a cell one time and had to go through all of the testing. He'd been called late during the night to go and see a prisoner, and they'd urinated in a cup and then threw it at him. So I take my hat off to our corrections officers. They do a really, really difficult job working with some really, at times, difficult people. They are not only prison officers, but they're social workers, they're counsellors, careers advisors. They do a huge amount of work. And I realised that after Dad passed away, and me and my family would have people come up to us and say, "Oh, I knew your dad from, when I was on the inside." And he sat there and he listened and he really talked to me. And I felt like he was the first person to actually really listen to me, and what he said really struck me. So that's why I strongly believe that in our correction system, there really does need to be a focus on rehabilitation, and that there needs to be a focus on reintegrating people into our society without stigma and without judgment.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It's a interesting subject during this campaign because there's some very interesting views, and obviously I'm not experienced in it. I think we all want a similar outcome. We want less crime. We want people to be rehabilitated, but the way to go about it is
it's not lock them up and throw away the key. There's like oodles of information that says that increasing prison sentences, one, it costs taxpayers more, but two, it actually does not deter people from committing a crime. If you're going to go and commit a burglary or steal a car or commit assault, you are not thinking, how much prison time am I going to get by doing this? So it's not a deterrent. So we actually really need to be getting in, working with our whānau on the ground, and putting those support structures in to break that cycle early on in individuals' lives. And you don't do that in prison.
Yeah, I think it winds up cheaper on the taxpayer as well if we do early intervention.
100%.
Just from a financial perspective.
Absolutely, it sure does.
Anyway, leading on from that, Anae, clearly you can multitask.
Trying to.
As a young teenager, you had to quit your local rugby club when you were diagnosed with bone cancer at 14. Which is wild. The stories you must have around that and the growth you must have is incredible. I'd love to hear more about that. But you went on to make a really incredible recovery. And I just want to know, how much did your experience within the medical system itself encourage or deter you from the path to becoming a health professional?
Yeah, so it really did encourage me to do what they did to help me as a patient. So my GP, my oncologist, my orthopedic surgeon, they all inspired me to pursue medicine as a career. And yeah, just wanted to learn more about what happened to me and how I can help support other people like me that's gone through rough times in the health system as well. So learned a bit, being a patient, of how primary care and secondary care talk to each other, and seeing some of the gaps there, which kind of helped me to have that insight to help support patients in the community as well. So yeah.
And while you were in the medical system as a patient, How do you think you were treated, and what improvements have been made since then, and what improvements still could be made?
Well, so I got diagnosed at 14, and I was a big 14-year-old. So I was supposed to be treated under Starship, under their cancer ward, but because I was quite a big, Samoan rugby player, um, I had to have adult drugs at the same time. So I got put in the adult ward, had the adult chemotherapy and so forth. But that kind of didn't help when I saw the much elderly or more mature patients having their treatment, and then some passing away and getting rolled down the hallway. So a bit of trauma there as a young fella. But, that was one thing that I learned, was that that sometimes the system is not catered for people in certain circumstances. And not only that, again, with the system between the primary and secondary care, back then, there wasn't an ideal IT system. I don't think there still is an ideal IT system where primary and secondary care can share notes and so forth. It has improved, but that's one of the goals for the new health system to grapple with, is one system where doctors can have access to all your medical records, whether it be in primary care or secondary care, and be able to treat you wherever you are in New Zealand. So those are some of the challenges that we face right now. It's progressed well since back then, but still more work to do.
Yeah, speaking of progress and I suppose controversy on this one, I'll just explain it to people who don't know. Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand recently introduced the Equity Adjuster Score, which is an algorithmic tool aimed at reducing healthcare disparities. This tool prioritizes patients based on clinical urgency, waitlist time, location, ethnicity, and deprivation level. It said that Māori and Pacifica ethnicities are prioritized higher due to disparities in referral time and other factors. While focused on elective surgeries and not emergencies, this move has still evoked a very varied global response. I think regardless where some may stand, it's sparking really important discussions, such as the underlying causes of preventable deaths and the feasibility of alternative solutions like improving living conditions and education, which is all fantastic. But what are your thoughts on this? And do you feel that an extra equity point out of 100 for Māori and Pacifica will make a tangible difference?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I really do think so. Just to remember that the equity adjuster does take in other variables as well, such as being in a rural area and deprivation areas and so forth. So I know that the other side, the opposition, have focused on the ethnic part of it. And the thing is, we want to have equitable outcomes, and if we did have equitable outcomes, then we wouldn't need the adjuster. But the reality is, we do need that tool to make sure that we're lifting the vulnerable communities, so that way they can have equal health outcomes like the rest of us, or the average Kiwi. So it's sad that the opposition have focused on the ethnic side of things, but as doctors, we are trained to look at key factors that influence health outcomes. So where I practice in South Auckland, if you come in and you have some sort of symptom, for me, I always put those symptoms higher level in terms of priority, because I know that the background that we have with Māori Pacific, they have, I guess, in terms of access, further backwards in terms of their access, and also their late stage of presentation as well. So there's different things that influence the outcomes for our people. So having the equity adjuster just helps supports that, so they can have equal outcomes, just like the average Kiwi.
Yeah, I think something that gets, I guess, put aside or ignored quite often is the fact that it is elective surgeries, and the need for help is far above any of the others as well. So it's not just basing it on, I guess, race per se.
So you've kind of already answered this, but in consideration of your personal and professional experience within the medical system, what already existing inequities is the tool trying to alleviate?
So yes, it's that whole socioeconomic background, high deprivation areas, looking at our rural folks, so different risk factors with that adjuster tool. So different things that we can help support our people, lift their accessibility, lift their priorities, so that way they have equal outcomes. So yeah, just what I've already mentioned before.
Yeah, you may have kind of touched on this, but the tool does appear to be supported by most health professionals. I think there was some surgeons that were anonymously contending it. But what are your thoughts on the controversy itself? Like, I'm sure we all want equitable outcomes. I think some people are just disagreeing as far as how that should be approached. Do you think this was an effective one to take, or if you were in the position to decide, is there a more pointed approach that you would have taken yourself?
We're always looking to improve on our clinical tools and priorities. So I think, this is one for now that I think it will do the job where we're currently at. But obviously anything will need review and to improve on things. So I'm really happy with the tool we got at the moment.
You were elected into Parliament just before COVID-19 struck the country. How obviously it was unexpected and it was not something that you thought you'd be dealing with in your first term in Parliament. How was this experience from your eyes, being an MP and being one of the rule setters, I guess, of the country? And were you able to take part in a political capacity and as a doctor at the time?
Yeah, before becoming an MP, I sat on the government's advisory panel, as using my experience and skills in primary care, and then jumping in as an MP, and when the lockdowns happened in Auckland, I was still able to help and support as a practicing clinician. So I'm still registered and so forth, because for me the importance is I keep my skills up to help support the community. Mum and Dad didn't send me to med school for nothing to give up on the investment they've made to me. But yeah, really, I'm just really grateful that I was still able to help support during the lockdowns, and I still do help out when I can in terms of volunteering for the marae and so forth. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. Steph, you've been patiently sitting back there for a while. I'll direct this one to you. I was watching the third reading of the Grocery Industry Competition Bill. It was brought up under new information regarding our two supermarkets taking home $1 million a day in excess profits. This was partly due to lack of competition driving prices down, because there aren't a lot of suitable sites under current laws, and no large independent wholesale sector to contend with a duopoly that is Foodstuffs and Woolworths. So when two dominant players each have their own wholesaler, and these wholesalers do not often trade with new or competing independent retailers, it must be especially difficult to bring in major competition to help drive those prices down. Can you give us a brief overview on how this bill intends to regulate the industry and create competition at the same time?
Absolutely. Look, this is part of the work that we've been doing for a long time to try and ease cost of living pressures, where you've only got, as you mentioned, a duopoly, you don't have competition. And so back in 2022, before then, we as a government asked the Commerce Commission to conduct a market study, which is how, and so it's that study that found out that supermarkets in New Zealand were making in excess of $1 million a day, over and above what's a reasonable profit. And so the Commission made 14 recommendations to the government to try and improve competition in our grocery sector. And we as a government decided to take some of those on board. In some cases, we went a little bit further. And that's where the Grocery Industry Competition Bill came from. So, one of the things that does is, we've done. So one of the ways that the supermarkets could drive out competition was they would put caveats over land saying that no other supermarket could buy or build or open within a certain distance of the existing supermarket. So like you said, foodstuffs or Woolworths. And so we've removed their ability to do that because that was identified as one of the main barriers to new supermarkets coming into New Zealand and opening their doors here, which would obviously then increase supply competition if we had new players in the market. And the other thing, one of the other major changes that we've done through this reform is, as part of the Commerce Commission, we have put in place a grocery commissioner role. So there's been a grocery commissioner in place since June this year, and part of the work that they'll be able to do now is to actually properly investigate instances of price gouging, of anti-competitive behaviour, and actually they'll have the powers and ability to go and investigate and do something when prices are that New Zealanders are paying at the supermarket are unfair. And Anae and I are out on the doorsteps and phones talking to our community all the time, and the cost of living, particularly the cost of groceries, has come up again and again. And so this is just one small way that we as a government can support people to try and make ends meet a bit better. So it's also going to create, because you mentioned the other issues around that wholesale access. So the other thing that the bill has done is created that wholesale regime. So it will again improve that competition. It's going to allow for easier entry into the wholesale market and also expansion. So it's the other thing that we've been, and I was also quite excited about, because prior to becoming an MP, I was the chair of Labour's Economic Policy Committee. And one of the things that we've been talking about even way back then was a grocery code of conduct, basically. And so that's one of the things that we have. We've implemented sort of a grocery supply code to try and, again, make sure that they're not engaging in anti-competitive behaviour, and we've also provided a new dispute resolution tool as well. So some pretty big shake up in the industry, but for the first time last month, for the first time in a long time, we actually saw grocery prices start to dip down. So long way to go, absolutely, a lot more work to do. But it's nice to see that it's starting to track in the direction that we want it to go in, which will ultimately make life a little bit easier for Kiwis.
Yeah, do you have an estimation of how much this bill could potentially drop prices?
No, I don't off the top of my head. But I mean, we're also competing with inflation at the moment, or doing battle with inflation. So at the same time as trying to introduce competition, we're also trying to bring inflation down. And we're having to do some really targeted support measures and get support to people in a way that's not going to drive inflation up, which of course would then push prices, including our grocery prices, back up. So we are seeing, the important take home though is that we are seeing those prices start to head back in the right direction. Of course, there's always going to be that seasonal variability, but we've got broccoli in season, and if a supermarket's saying $10 of broccoli and we're like, wait, it's in season right now, then we're finally going to have the tools. We've got the grocery commissioner who can come in and say, that's not right. Broccoli is in season right now. Kiwis shouldn't have to pay $10 for a head of broccoli. So, we've got those tools there that we didn't have before. So I do believe that will make a difference. And, the supermarket chains have said, yep, they accept the writing is on the wall. And, hopefully we'll see them act accordingly.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like, if you're thinking not on the supermarket level, but like pharmacies, when Chemist Warehouse and Bargain chemist came to New Zealand, you saw that, those unique pharmacies had to either reduce their prices or shut down because they just weren't getting the business. And I guess in comparison, like when you're looking at Australia, which does have a decent level of competition, you see that that price kind of is regulated because that's the only way they can really stay in business.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I was kind of also kind of on that, but a bit of a deterrent to offshore investors is the overseas investment approval process and restrictions on buying residential and lifestyle property. So what are the changes that are happening there?
So, I mean, obviously, in terms of houses, we've got our ban on overseas investors coming in and buying up homes here in New Zealand. So that was something that we passed in our first term of government, and we did that because we've got some of the most expensive housing in the OECD, and our rents were going up. The first time buyers were being pushed out of the market, and we believed that that was unfair, and we wanted to take that heat out of the market to try and open up that fairness. In terms of then we've got that in our housing area at play. In terms of our farms, and coming back full circle back to our food and fibre sector and our farmers and growers, we've got the Overseas Investment Office tool where they've got to do one of the things that they do when investors are looking at coming in and investing in New Zealand, and that might be in farmland, is the benefit to the New Zealand test. So if they're coming in and proposing, say, wholesale conversion of what is currently a dairy farm into forestry, now, and because of changes that we've made, the Overseas Investment Office will have to will actually, on the whole, sort of like a cost and balance exercise, what is the best benefit to New Zealand? Is it to convert that farmland, that food producing land, into production forestry, or not? So now we've got the ability to actually do that sort of check and balance. And one of the biggest, we talk a lot, I hear a lot as well about conversion of food producing land into forestry, but actually what we're not talking about as much, in what is a bigger risk, I think personally, to our food and fibre sector and our ability to produce sustainable low carbon food at scale, is actually conversion to lifestyle blocks. Because you look at the food that you can produce on a farm at a much bigger scale versus what you can produce on a lifestyle block, and the reality is, on a lifestyle block, you're just basically producing what you need for your own family most of the time. It's more of a sort of hobby, and as in the title, a lifestyle. So we definitely do need to get that balance right. And I mean, certainly in my neck of the woods, we're not seeing that kind of intensification, and we're not quite seeing so much of that urban sprawl. I think it's starting to happen, because definitely in Whanganui and Stratford and Harita, in particular, we have seen population growth over the last few years. But I'm also quite confident that our councils are looking at where we can do infill housing, so to increase the density of the housing that we've already got, because we are my electorate is in very provincial New Zealand, so we really value that food producing land, and we know that we've got to look after it. It's really crucial to our economy, to our rural communities. So those and what we call brownfield developments as well. So reusing land within the urban boundaries that we've already got, and perhaps rezoning some of that to residential is really important to protect that food producing land.
Do you think the inability for foreigners to purchase houses in New Zealand, do you think that's a deterrent to something such as increasing more supermarket chains, or do you feel like the owners of that may not even want to move here anyway? It's not really a deterrent.
So the foreign buyers thing ban is only applies to people who don't live in New Zealand. So if you are somebody who wants to come into New Zealand, invest in a new supermarket, open it up and live here, not a problem. But if you are somebody who goes, oh, actually, there's some cheap housing in Whanganui, I'm going to go and buy up some houses, put them on the market for rent and be an absentee landlord, then we're saying no thank you to that. So I definitely think that if you want to invest in business here, and there is absolutely that support and that opportunity to come and live here and make New Zealand your home and love it as much as we do.
So I guess now we've got questions for both of you together. It's becoming clearer how panic buying has ensured throughout Parliament and among the public, especially in the last few years. Health Minister Aisha Verrall confirmed that we have over $158 million in expired rat tests, and that other countries are also experience this large excess. How could we improve our response in the future if this ever happens again?
Fingers crossed it doesn't.
I think because we're having that, the COVID-19 review and so forth, that will definitely help in our response in the future. But, given the circumstances we were under, this, like we said, this is, 1 in 100 years sort of thing. And to see this develop where there was a lot of uncertainty and many countries were obviously grappling with the same issue. That's why they've got the same issue post COVID, and we needed to make sure that there was security for us as well. And because of the uncertainty, obviously we've left with those rats tests, but it's looking, that's the benefit of hindsight. Hey, you can look back and say this and that, but during that time, a lot of people were pressured. The health system was under pressure. We didn't know whether, in terms of the vaccines or the development and then the rats test, there were so many things going on that we had to make sure that, we were serving New Zealanders the best we can with the information that we had at the time. So, yes, once the review's done and we can look back and see where we can improve on, but I think, if you're looking at the stats and the given that, how many lives that we've protected, you compare that to other countries that opened up because they've put first their economic factors first. We put first our health of our people, then making sure that was going to be our best response economically as well. So that's the benefit of what we've done, where we can sit now and deal with the inflation at the moment and deal with other economic pressures because of the position that we were in when we made that decision to put health of New Zealanders first.
There was no playbook. And at one point, actually, Anae and I were sitting in Parliament alongside our ministers, and, the government was being accused by the opposition of not getting rats into New Zealand fast enough. So, we, as Anae said, we did the best we could with the information we had at the time.
Yeah, I think the other thing is if you didn't get enough, then the public would have been complaining about that too. So it's kind of a lose-lose either way. You do the best you can, right?
You do.
How have you both noticed COVID-19, how have you noticed it taking effect on the mental health in our communities in New Zealand and the health sector and so forth?
Yeah, from a rural point, I definitely think, with the lockdowns and stuff, that isolation has become a bigger issue. For some of our rural communities, they were already struggling with that isolation, being pretty remote communities. And I think COVID, and that lockdown and the lockdowns and the borders being closed for a while, not being able to see or travel and see family and stuff, that's definitely taken a bit of a toll on our rural communities in particular, and we are seeing an increase in mental health. We're also, as Anae said earlier, in regards to the algorithm, our rural communities are, tend to be more remote, more isolated, have less access to mental health support, to GP support. I think of other community pātea in my electorate who struggle to keep and to attract and retain a GP. So that has definitely come to the fore. I think we're also seeing it among our tamariki and our rangatahi in terms of increased levels of anxiety. I personally think, and I'm not a health professional by any means, I think what is encouraging though is that our rangatahi and our tamariki are able to give it a label and explain their feelings a lot better, which hopefully means we can get in with that early intervention and wraparound support and give them what they need.
Yeah, and during the Auckland lockdowns, I just want to acknowledge the churches and the community groups and organizations that wrapped around our rangatahi and our adults as well that were going through a rough time. But yeah, it was a bit of a struggle. But being able to go walk your dog and go around the block just to get some fresh air, just other means to try to shake off some of that isolation stuff. But yeah, I think the 1737 number, other access for our people really helped support them. But yeah, it was a tough time for everyone.
Do you see much of an improvement at the moment, or are we still kind of stuck under that smog?
I think there's post-COVID, we still say it's post-COVID now, but I think there has been an improvement. You still have the residual effect of COVID with people. There's still some people that are suffering from long COVID as well. It's a new phenomena for us to still keep researching. But I think the investment that's been done in primary care, in terms of have better ways of engaging our people, that has been a good support for our community.
Yeah. So just to wrap up the interview, we'd like to know what have been some of your most memorable and also some of your funniest moments in your political career so far.
I realised, Harita, that I didn't quite fully answer one of your earlier questions. So I'm going to weave these answers together.
I think I know what one it is.
The funniest one. So I did, as you mentioned earlier, have a baby during my first term of Parliament. So he's now 16 months old. And so I came back to Parliament when he was about 3.5 months old, and continued working as an MP. And, in those first few weeks when he was a newborn, still did some constituent work and community stuff in my local electorate. So I've sort of had to have that juggle of being a mum and an MP. And, I did things that I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined doing, like breastfeeding in the debating chamber. But having my son in the debating chamber also meant that from time to time he would get a little bit vocal. And I remember one time Ian McKelvey was speaking and Flynn decided to really go for it. Ian did a point of order to the speaker, saying that he was being unreasonably interjected while speaking. So it was definitely an interesting learning curve. I'd also take him into caucus for breastfeeding as well. And a couple of times he would interrupt the Prime Minister or the Minister of Finance. Or it's sort of just, so it is, it's been an interesting and steep learning curve, but I'm so lucky that I've had the support of my family and the support of my colleagues, people like Anae, who has a bubba a similar age to mine, and we've just managed to make it work. I was lucky in that because we don't get sick leave, we don't get parental leave as MPs because we're not employed by anyone. So I was lucky that we were able to negotiate with the Speaker so as I could have some time off to recover after the birth of my son. And unfortunately, it did end up being a bit of a traumatic birth. He had to go into NICU for almost 2 weeks. So I was so lucky that I was just really wrapped around and my colleagues supported me. And when I did go back to work in Parliament as well, I had Chris Hipkins was one of the first MPs, and Jacinda and some of the other mamas in Parliament, you know, came down and like, what do you need? What do you need? And I ended up getting a bouncer. Chris Hipkins dropped a bouncer off in my office for me just to make sure that I had the tools I needed, whatever they look like, to be able to do my job. And so I'm really, really lucky. And then I was able also to have special leave in the evening, so I could go home and feed Flynn and get him settled and into bed. And sometimes I would come back into Parliament, and sometimes I'd have the rest of the night off on leave, so to speak. So yeah, some of my most memorable moments are around being a mum with a young baby in Parliament, but also being sworn in for the first time as an MP, making your maiden speech in Parliament. And I'm really, really lucky in that in my first term as an MP, I was able to pass my own private member's bill unanimously even. So that's with the support of all parties in Parliament. So there have been a lot of really cool milestones in the last 3 years that I look back on fondly and I'm pretty proud of.
That's really sweet. What about you and I?
My one's similar in terms of family. I guess there's two things. One is family, like having my baby girl. I think she's like 2 weeks younger than yours. I think, Steph.
Yeah, they're real close in age.
Yeah, and having baby, because I know that the previous speaker, Trevor Mallard, he always likes to hold
Yes.
tamariki. So baby was have the privilege to be with Trevor Mallard. And also she had the opposition swooning over her at one time when I brought her into the debating chamber, so that was cool. But other than that, because of my electorate, we do have a diverse community, and we have quite a large Indian community. So what I've learned, I've they've kind of adopted me into their community, and I've eaten the wonderful food, but I've also learned how to dance Bhangra. So Bhangra is one of the dancing things. Yeah, so every time I go to an event like tonight, I'm going to an ethnic event. I'm always ready to do some Indian dancing or Punjabi dancing. So that's been cool to learn. I love dancing my Pasifika culture, but having the Indian culture has been a really good privilege and quite funny at the same time to be doing it. So no, it's been a good term these last 2 years. Yeah.
Oh, that's really great. Thank you both so much for joining. And I'm sure our listeners really appreciate your insights, especially regarding some of the more contentious issues. I think it's always really good to give people a platform to really talk without being interrupted like so many people are and having antagonistic comments thrown at them. So I really, really appreciate that. So thank you. Thank you so much. And
Thank you both.
It was great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, team. Have a good one.